There we go. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We are just so thrilled to be able to chat about this with you. We're so grateful for your time and just for your words and just your willingness to be vulnerable and put this story, a part of you, out into the world. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you all for tracking it down and reading it and talking about it and posting about it. And I mean, it's like, it's such, that just really, it really means a lot. It means a lot when people actually try to find your work, to read about it and to tell other people about it. I mean, I can't tell you how meaningful that is. It means a lot. I really appreciate you guys.
Well, we were happy to do it. We were all so blown away. I want to introduce you to Ivana, my co-host too.
Hi.
Hi, Ilona. We're so happy you're here. We can't believe that we get to talk to you.
So I think that what we'll do is we'll just start off with a few questions that kind of we all had, and then we'll open it up to the chat and see if other people have questions for you as well.
Yeah.
Just to start us off, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about just your inspiration for the story and kind of how this came about in your mind.
Yeah. So I had a 2-book deal with When I Ran Away. So that meant for the second book, I was contracted to write it, and I had a year to write it. And unfortunately for me, that year was 2020. So I found myself just at home, homeschooling, trying to keep the family together, doing all those things we were all doing. But at the same time, trapped inside. And I think you can feel that claustrophobia in the book. I had started writing it in 2019. The initial idea was just about Penny and Woman and them living in a building and finding out about one another. But as time went on and things started changing, some of the scenes that I was writing were actually starting to happen. So I had written Penny first, and all the things that she does, like wearing like her mask and her whole outfit, her getup, her hand sanitizer, the way that she got her grocery deliveries. She didn't want to touch anyone. And then she was, how she does girl talk in front of the mirror, where she's talking to herself to try to remember how to do that. I remember watching a viral video of this man in Italy who was having a cocktail party with himself. It was very funny. He was in a 3-way mirror in his bathroom. He was cheersing himself and he was chatting as though there were guests at a party. And then I realized, like, all the stuff that I'm writing, I have to figure out what to do. Because it's that Penny's world is actually not that bizarre anymore. I think we used to look at people like her and think, oh, they're so strange, housebound, and so odd. But actually, I had to figure out a way to make the story interesting. So that's how the pandemic became part of the backdrop. So the women kind of became my friends in lockdown. They lived with me. They felt like real people. I was very lucky to have this project to work on because I needed a way to escape. So it's not the book that I thought it was going to be, but I think, the circumstances we all found ourselves in, this is kind of where it ended up.
That's so interesting, kind of how you had those parallels and just how really it morphed into the story that it was meant to be. Wow, that's so interesting. In your author's note, you talk a little bit about your background as working with immigration law and being an immigrant yourself. Can you talk a little bit about just your experience in that regard and how that informed your writing?
Yeah. So I loved being an immigration lawyer. I really loved it because what happens is, like, every day you never know who is going to walk into the office and what story they are going to tell you. People have such incredible journeys that they take, families they leave behind, reasons that they migrate, things that happen to them along the way. I just found it absolutely fascinating. I loved it. So I kind of, none of the people in the books are actually people who I know. I would never do that with someone's story. But I definitely filed away sort of the emotions that they brought with them. After I had my kids, I tried to go back to the law, but I found it very, very difficult to get hired. And I realized, and the jobs that I was offered, The pay wasn't enough to handle the childcare. It's a situation many women find themselves in. We would just be breaking even. If I went back to work, my kids were really little. It just didn't make sense. Now this was way, I think if I was trying to go back now, it would have been a different story. Now that we all know that women can work anywhere that they are, they don't have to be in an office. But at the time, law was a very inflexible field. So I felt very sad, about leaving that career. I pivoted and I started writing, but I've always felt a kind of unfinished business because the issues that people deal with are still really, really important to me. I still care very much about migrants and the issues that they face, particularly women. So as I was writing, I didn't realize that this was what was happening. But as I was writing each character, because I am, legally trained, I would pick them apart, and they kind of started becoming clients. And I was inventing these backstories for them and trying to make sure that it would be accurate, that they came in this way, and what visa would they have, and what year would she have gotten it, and how. And then I realized that this is really me wanting to tell the public about migration, the things that maybe they don't know. There's a lot of stuff that you see in the news, but that's not necessarily what goes on in the background. And so I wanted to share that inside knowledge that I have. And I think fiction is an amazing way to do that, because it's not, standing on a platform and shouting about the horrible things that happen to migrants, but it's introducing people to these stories maybe in a way that they hadn't thought about before, or that they didn't know, or that they didn't realize. So this is kind of like my, I don't know, it's my saying bye to my profession, I think, but wanting to make sure that I can still advocate for all those people who I met and that I worked with.
Wow, that's so interesting. I think sometimes too, like as a professional, you take for granted the information that you know and possess, and it just kind of becomes second nature to you. And so once you kind of just think about the general public and that knowledge base, it's really nice that you were able just to kind of weave that into the story, because it did add so much.
Yeah, because there are things that people don't realize, like the visa that Carla ends up getting based on domestic violence. People don't know enough about that there, you have it in the US too, under the Violence Against Women Act. There are ways of helping women who find themselves in situations that are abusive. I don't think people often don't think about how immigration can be used as a tactic to control someone. Knowing someone's migration status and being dependent on someone for your migration status, what a tool for manipulation that can be. It's not a story we hear a lot about. So I feel like sharing that information is also really important.
Yeah, that wasn't something that I had considered either. Abby, if you're free right now, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, the one about craft is
Whatever you
I
want.
ended up with like 1,000.
Do all your
I would just love to
things.
sit and have coffee with you.
That's
But I'll pick one just, and you kind of alluded to it already, but I told them earlier when we were chatting in our book club part that like I've never read a book that switched perspectives so frequently, but like you did it so well. It wasn't choppy. I just was floating around with these women. And how did you write it? Did you write huge chunks of storylines and then snip them apart, or like what did that look like? Just because I can't imagine switching perspectives that much and doing it so well.
Thank you. That's a really good question. I wrote this in a really haphazard way because I didn't have the chunks of time that you need. I kind of write, and like when I'm in the really thick of writing, I need sort of 3 to 4 hours a day, because that's all the words that I can think of in a day is in that amount of time. But with the kids and the homeschooling and the family around all the time, and us not being able to go anywhere, and everyone here all the time, and the laundry and the food and everything that was involved, that time just didn't exist. My kids also have ADHD and dyslexia, so homeschooling for them was really, really challenging. I had to be there for every single minute of it. There was no just put them in front of the screen and they do their stuff. I was very, very in it. So I ended up writing sort of 20 minutes at lunch, a half an hour in the morning before the kids got online. On the weekends, my husband would take the kids out to the woods or wherever we were allowed to be. And I would get sort of, 3 hours at a time then. But I wrote it like really chaotic. That's why you'll notice the sections are actually quite short. Like the chapters and the sections, it's all very brief because I had just very brief sort of moments in time to write it. And I don't write with an outline. I sort of need to wait for the characters to tell me what to do. So the twists and turns that it takes are really all, they kind of happen very organically. I think in retrospect, when I look at it, I think it can be quite a hard read if you're not a person who is into character this way. I think there is a lot of chopping and changing. But I think that also kind of reflects my mental state and probably the mental state of a lot of us at the time. My brain was really scattered. So I think changing the voices helped me to tell the story because I don't think I could have done it in a linear way.
Thank you. That's fascinating because to me, it just felt like genius where to know that it just kind of came out of your chaotic, but it really worked. So thank you for answering that.
And maybe that's why before you hopped on, Ilona, we were all saying how when we read books with multiple characters and perspectives, we tend to love one particular character the most and want to get back to them. But with your book, we just loved all of the women equally. And maybe that's because what you were just saying, maybe it's because you gave us them so frequently and the way that you crafted it. Maybe that's why we just really couldn't pick like a favorite woman. We just loved all of them.
And because it was so short, like the little snippets, it like kept being like, I can do one more. I can do one more. I like couldn't. As in sometimes when things are character and they're longer, I'm like, okay, like give me something, give me somebody else now. But I literally would be like, I got 5 more minutes. I got 10 more minutes, or because I wanted to see what happened so badly to the next person. And I knew you were going to give it to me quickly.
See, that's really good that you say that because one thing I do, so I don't have an outline and I don't write with a plan, but one thing I know is that I only have like a 10-minute attention span before I fall asleep. Like that's all I can do. And any kind of reading, like it knocks me out like right away. So I did this in my first book too. I keep things purposely short because I know, particularly my, women readers who are reading with the short amount of time that they have and how tired they are, that it feels really good to actually finish. It always feels good to finish a chapter, doesn't it? So if it's short, you can feel accomplished and you want to keep going. So that is something I think about is kind of brevity. Because that's for me too. Like I have a hard time reading really long stuff as well.
Yeah, I think we're all nodding along to that. Like, amen.
And it was hard to put the book down. I mean, that's like what like Brittany, what you're saying is so true. It's like I got 5 more minutes. And then you just end up saying that I can't put the book down. Like it's just, yeah.
That's such a compliment. Thank you.
Just to kind of go off what you were talking about with how you plan or don't plan ahead for your story, were there any major plot points that you ended up reworking or things that you had wanted to go a certain way initially and then like brought it to your editor or publisher and they were like, hey, no, let's think about it this way?
Yeah, so the pandemic, that was one. I almost abandoned the whole book because I thought it wasn't going to work. So I had to talk to my editor and agent then and say, like, what are we going to do here? Because I've got this story, but it's actually not that much of a story because we're all living it right now. That was one. The other one was actually Mabel and Carla. So the initial idea was that it would be a very intense relationship between Penny and Woman. And I had neighbors there. I had Mabel there. She was going to kind of pop in and out. And I had Carla as the next door neighbor. But part of why I don't like having an outline is because those two characters refused to be sidelined. Like I would write them and I would like write scenes with Mabel and Mabel was like, excuse me, like I have some things I want to say and some stuff I want to do. So she refused to be a side character. And Carla was the same. Carla, I had her as a kind of like this really difficult neighbor who wasn't very nice, but she just kind of refused to sit down. Like she was like, there's something here and I need to get it out. So I was very much led by them. So when I initially pitched this book, they weren't there, but they appeared as time went on. They refused to be sidelined. So, and I'm glad about that because I think it made it much more interesting story.
Yeah, in the chat, Tina wrote, she's knocking on your door to spread the good word.
Yeah, she had a lot to say.
She sure did. She sure did. Jen has a question about woman. Jen, are you free to ask that?
Yeah. Well, we had a little conversation as a group before, and we were wondering, is there a reason that you only gave woman alternate endings and none of the other characters got the several different endings?
Yeah. So if you read the back as well, so you know that in the UK, the woman's storyline very much reflects the situation in the UK for a woman who was trafficked in the way that she was through an overseas domestic worker visa. And when I was looking and researching, what happens to the women who end up in this situation, those are the things that actually happen. They get re-trafficked. They may return home, but returning home can be really difficult because if you haven't made the money that you promised, there's a lot of shame that can be attached to it. Being re-trafficked is the other thing that happens frequently, like what happens to her when she gets picked up again and taken to the marijuana farm. Those are all things based on the news, things that have actually happened to people, and they're very common. And I didn't want, when I was writing her ending, the first time I wrote it, it was all kind of one thing where I was trying to demonstrate all these things that could have happened to her. But I didn't want it to feel like a law textbook, and I didn't want it to be boring. And I didn't want to describe these really sad situations in a way that kind of brought you down at the end. But her situation is a very complex one. Any woman in that situation, the things that happen to them are really complicated. And I also wanted there to be one ending where we felt some hope that that maybe there could be a different way, and that maybe she could see her family again, and maybe maybe she could go home and it would be okay. So the idea came to me that instead of trying to force it all into one thing and have it be like very legalistic and hard to read, like why don't I just let you decide what happens? Like these are the things that can happen, and we can all hope for the last one. The others are unfortunately more realistic, but I wanted us to end with an image of her, finding happiness, a little bit of hope at that.
Jen, maybe you should say what you were thinking too,
Yeah.
because it was so smart. I just.
Okay. So yeah, I was telling them that I thought it was because she was the only one that really got out of her prison, or like didn't escape from the prison. So she was like fully escaped from the apartment and was gone. And so she could have alternate realities, whereas the others were still living it.
Yeah, that's a great way of looking at it. That's very true, isn't it? Because she's the only one who managed to actually get out of the building, right? In the end. Yeah, that's a great way of looking at it. Also, her character, she is nameless and she doesn't have an identity because she represents a lot of women. So I also wanted her to do that. Like if we think about women as lots of different women, these are all the different things that could happen to women like her. But you're absolutely right. And I also wanted her very much for it to be a story in which she wasn't rescued, in which she is the one who drove her release and her escape, that she had agency. So that's good that you looked at it that way. She is the one who escapes, because it's true. She's the one who got out. She's the one who masterminds everything at the end.
Yeah, I just reading that ending just gave me chills in like the best way. Like I feel like I'm fairly like stoic when I'm reading, but that ending, I just like immediately welled up and got chills. I'm like, yes, this is it. This is what I want for her, even though I knew it wasn't maybe necessarily the most realistic thing, but I just love that you gave us just that little slice of, well, maybe. It just felt, we were talking to about how overall there were there dark themes in the story, but in general, we felt like this was uplifting, and just does show the connection between people in hard times. And so we weren't left feeling like this was like a big downer at all. We felt like the overall tone was hopeful.
I'm really glad to hear that. That's really good, because it does get described as dark a lot. And sometimes I go to book groups and things, and people are quite emotional or upset about different parts of it. Because I know it is a lot. It's heavy. There's heavy issues in it. It was a heavy time when I wrote it. It's a heavy time. But it's good. I'm glad to hear that people find that there are glimmers of hope in it. It's also, I did this with When I Ran Away as well. Like it's not realistic to have endings that tie up in a bow. We really want that, but it's more realistic that things can have like half a bow or like a small knot. It's not going to be like a pretty bow, but Penny gets a little bit better, and she has a real friendship, and now she has real support. That's realistic. Is she ever going to be 100% better and go back to work and see her daughter again? I don't know. That's why I left the bit about, I never say what happens with her and Olivia, because I don't know if that's possible. She was very, very, very ill. But we can have things get a little bit better, because I think in life that is really what happens. Things get a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
I would love for them all to have like a brilliant, amazing rainbow. But unfortunately it's not very real.
Yeah. I think just those little glimmers that you gave us as readers were like enough. Like we can take that and run with it if we want. So I appreciated that. One of the questions that we were chatting about in our just little book club, and Tina just mentioned to me in the chat too, can you talk a little bit about the Gigi cameo? Is that Gigi from When I Ran Away? Is it just a coincidence you just like the name Gigi, or?
Yeah, that's Gigi from When I Ran Away. Because Gigi's story started in 2016 or 2017. So by the time this book starts, Gigi would have had, 4 or 5 years to recover and get it together and decide what she was going to do with her life. So when I got to the bit, I didn't know I was going to put her in, but when I got to the bit about Carla needing a lawyer, I was like, oh, Gigi, like she still lives there. She still lives in London. And she got it together and she went back to work. And so her kids are that little bit older. And it was just a nod to anyone who had read the first book to know that like, she's okay. Like she was all right in the end. And at the moment, what I seem to be doing is writing in my own neighborhood, like where I live. Because when I wrote Little Prisons, like I feel like they all live in the same neighborhood. I feel like Gigi lives like 2 streets away from where this building is. I like to think about them all sort of, these people I've invented, like walking, parallel streets. So it felt like exactly the right place to put her, just to let people know that like she was all right. She ended up okay.
I love that. Thanks for doing that, because it's so fun when those like worlds collide a little bit. So yeah, a few of us picked up on that. So thank you for including her in there. It's so fun to see her.
It's a little secret.
Yes.
I was going to ask too, with your immigration status and things, did you live in the US and then you moved over to London, and how long have you been in London?
Yeah. So I grew up in New York and I lived in New York. When I was 25, I met my husband. My husband is British and he was working in the States. He worked in the States for about 5 years when I met him. Then we stayed together for a little bit, and then he finished business school and I finished law school, and he got a job offer here in London. And I was really burnt out after law school and I didn't really think it through. And I was just kind of like, sure, yeah, that sounds great. Let's do it. And like 15 years later, here I am, and we have 2 children and a house, and this is where we live. And I'm a British citizen now. So I had to requalify to become an English solicitor. So we didn't really plan it, but this is kind of where life led us. And that experience of being married, well, one, going through the immigration process myself, obviously it was much, much easier for me than it is for many people. There's definitely two tiers of people when you migrate. So that is something I feel quite keenly. But I also have felt what it feels like to be interviewed, and have felt what it feels like when you don't have the right papers and you're questioned at the border and your passport is looked at and you have to carry a letter whenever you're alone with your child, these kinds of things. So I just think they're interesting. They're part of my story. And they're part of why I am really interested in migration stories. My family were refugees from Ukraine in the Second World War. So migration and refugee stories, they've always been sort of in the backdrop of my family life and my family history. My dad was an immigration lawyer as well. So migration has always been a big kind of theme of my own life. And you do write from your own experience. So, yeah.
So interesting. Thank you. We can tell it's rooted deeply in you, so it shines through your writing.
Yeah, it's very much when you grow up in an immigrant family, and I think this is true for people from lots of different communities and lots of different ways that people migrate and for different reasons, but there is that people sacrificed for you, that they gave up a lot, because they remind you all of the time. They never let you forget it. And you feel a sense of responsibility and obligation to do well, to do more than what you were given, and also to give back and to support and always take care of that community. So I think when you're raised with that, it's sort of it never leaves. It's always there.
Definitely.
Ilona, do you have any favorite characters or scenes? I'm sure the characters hold like a different spot in your heart, but any specific scenes that you loved writing or that just came easy to you, or just kind of stand out to you as part of your favorites of the book?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I have a different relationship with each lady. So like the thing I loved, the one thing that was really fun for me to write is the scene where Jamie takes Olivia to the playground, and he lets her climb on the big jungle gym, and she falls through, and he has that whole scene, and there's the judgment of all the other parents, and that was the writing. That dialogue was actually really fun for me to do. There are lots of aspects of Penny that I love very deeply. I really love her, and inventing things that happened to her, like her buying all those chicken nuggets and keeping them in the freezer. When I figure out details like that, it's always really exciting for me, because I feel like those details are what really makes a character come alive. Mabel, I loved writing Mabel. Mabel also, even though she's Jamaican and she was a nurse and Jehovah's Witness and all these things very different to my own background, my grandmother, who's in her 90s now, she lived for 50 years. She lived in a 5-floor walk-up in Queens. And she was that lady who every time she got to the next floor, because she lived on the 5th floor, every time she walked up a floor, she would go and chat to the neighbors on that floor to take a break from walking up the stairs. So she was that lady who knocked on everybody's door, whether they wanted her to or not, and found out everybody's business and asked questions that she wasn't supposed to ask. She did that. So a little bit of her is in Mabel. I really loved writing the scenes between Carla and Darren, just because I want her to be okay. I want them to work out. I really want Carla and Darren to work out. And it was fun to, they brought a little bit of levity, so it was fun. It was fun to do that. Yeah, so I feel, I have this soft spot for each of the ladies.
A few girls in the chat said they loved when Penny wrote that rant on the mommy chat rooms.
Oh yeah, that was fun to write. That was fun to write too. Writing Penny's dialogue was really fun because she has such a specific way of speaking. So I really liked inhabiting her.
Yeah, that was good. Abby in the chat mentioned too that you do such a good job of using fiction to challenge people's ideas or to spread awareness of issues. And she's wondering, all caps, hopes that you have other plans for the future. If you do, are you able to chat about what you're working on next? If you've got something in the works?
Yeah, so I am working on another book. With each book, you kind of learn. I mean, I'm still learning, right? Like I've only been doing this for like 5 years. Still very much at the beginning of my career. And I think with each book you learn what people like and what people don't like. And it's not that you should write to people's preferences, but if you want people to read your stuff and to get your message, then you need to present it in a way that they're going to enjoy. So I think from each experience I've learned what people like and what people like to read. So the next book that I'm writing, I don't have a deal for at the moment, so it's just still something that I'm working on. But this was going to be a little bit of a departure. So it's not going to be so heavy in terms of the social issues, but it's still going to be very character driven. So at the moment it's called 5, and it's about 5 people on a train platform 5 minutes before one of them dies. And it's only got 5 chapters, and each chapter is 1 minute. And we see how the people, and there's also 5 witnesses who interact with them. And in each chapter, you learn the backstory of one of the people. And they all have really interesting stories to tell. It's definitely psychological examinations of people, like I like to do. But I'm going to try something a little bit different. It's going to be a little bit lighter. Even though I'm talking about someone dying at the end, it should be a bit funnier in the way that When I Ran Away was funny. So yeah, I'm excited to see where that's going.
That sounds incredible. Yeah, people in the chat sold. Yep. That structure sounds so cool and so unique. I can't wait to see what you got.
I'm going to try to do something that's like linear, because I know that something that people struggle with is, because I struggle with it too when I read it in books, when you have multiple timelines or you have multiple characters and multiple points of view, like when there's a lot to keep track of, it can be hard to read. And that's something that I'm learning from kind of reviews and from people's responses and what people get and what they don't get. So I'm going to try with this one. I'm experimenting with structure and doing something that really does go in a straight line and see how that feels. See if we can still do the same kinds of interesting things with people.
Yeah.
Also, now that Little Prisons has been out for a bit, is there any chance that the US, I mean, we're here, we're all like shouting for this book to be here. What else can we do? Like, is there anything else that can be said or done? We just can't believe that it's not here. It's shocking and it's ridiculous.
That's very kind. So this book we did, I think it went to 18 publishers in the US, and they all passed on it, not because they didn't like the writing, but I think they felt like it was too heavy for the moment. They felt like the market perhaps wasn't right for it. They felt like it was too many issues at once. And I think that anything that had the pandemic in it, people were very reluctant to touch. You can see that now. Like there's some pandemic fiction, but there's very little, because it's almost like we're not, you know what I mean? I think what's that show? There's only one show on TV that actually really tackled it. Oh my God, This Is Us.
This
right?
is us. Yep.
Yeah.
So This Is Us handled it, but very few other shows or films have touched it, unless they're talking about another kind of dystopian virus, science fiction kind of thing. And I think that's understandable. I think it can feel like it's too soon. So, publishing's a hard industry. Like it's like any other creative industry, like it's like being an actor or being a singer. Like sometimes people like it and sometimes people don't. And it depends on the market. Different countries have really different markets. And what works in one place may not work in another. So yeah, we definitely tried. I don't know enough to know like if that's something that you can attempt to do again, but it's very nice to know that so many of you are reading it and that you do like it, because I knew you'd like it. They didn't believe me, but I knew, I knew.
Right, like some of our girls are saying here, it was like such a subtle COVID. It wasn't like an in your face. It wasn't, we didn't, many of us chatted before you got on here saying we didn't leave this book thinking anything about COVID. At least some of us did not. It was, you're left with so much of these women and their experiences that so many American readers would connect and benefit, but
Well, and I made a comment about how I felt like you touched on it in such a good way with Penny and how she was so isolated. And then as COVID happened and she went out and people were masked and more apart, and making those parallels, I thought was so, so interesting. And I mean, I felt like it was an important point to make. I felt like you made some really good parallels. I kind of literally would, like, if I was going to tell someone about the book, I probably wouldn't even have said anything about COVID, like, unless they were really giving me a lot of time to tell them really a lot. But I felt like, and I said this to the chat earlier, I mean, COVID happened. I mean, we're not going to not write about it. It's going to be in stories. I mean, I guess they just don't think people are ready for it. But I mean, if you kind of know, like, I knew this book was going to be heavy, and I sort of waited until I had like where I knew I was going to kind of be in a headspace to like read it. But then I also, as much as I would be like, dang it, Carla, or whoever, I had a lot of Carla, like, come on, Carla. But I felt like it was gonna be important. Like I was like, this is so heavy and there's a lot going on and I'm really upset for everybody in here. But I sensed this important underlying piece, and I wanted to get like through the end of it to see all the important pieces sort of come together, even though I was like, this is heavy and this is so crappy, but it felt important. I don't know how to say it any better than that.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah, it's interesting because I didn't know going in that it had even took place during COVID, because I was interested in it. Tina mentioned it on her podcast. And so that's why I bought it from Blackwell's, and I didn't know it had anything to do with COVID. And I read it because I really liked your first novel. But I honestly, just to be totally honest, if I had known, I'm not interested in COVID books yet. Like, it's too fresh, and like it's too, even reading it, when it got to that part in your novel about them being stuck at home, and it's like, I was thinking a little bit about, like, I almost feel like I've blocked that out. Like I've forgotten what that was like because that was so hard. So I understand. I mean, I think the US should publish it. I bet they will at some point, but I can see why there'd be hesitation.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like in the chat, people were talking about Jodi Picoult's book, and she did a COVID book, and I mean, a lot of people thought it was terrible. But it probably got published because she's got such a big name. And she was able to get away with it, but it didn't mean it was good. I mean, I just think it's, I don't know. I can see that it's a little fresh.
Yeah.
But
and I think that's fair, and I think that's understandable, because we have all just been through something very traumatic, and people aren't ready to revisit that yet, or look at it yet, or deal with it. Which is why when I was talking to my editor about it, I did feel like I had to be very careful about how I handled it, because just for that reason. So I think you take a risk when you do something like that. It was the same with my first book, when writing about 9/11, even though that's 20 years ago now. I thought very, very carefully, is this okay to do? Now we're ready to talk about that now, because it has been a long time, but it's been 2 decades, and it may be the same with COVID. It's going to take us a while before we're ready to kind of revisit it. And I think that's fair. But I also, when I was researching what was, Penny's mental health, I found it really, really interesting what I was reading about people with anxiety and how they were feeling better in lockdown than they had before. And that, people who'd never had anxiety before, it was going through the roof. But people who live with anxiety actually felt okay. We're feeling better for a long time.
That I'll tell you, I was telling the group before you joined that, I mean, I'd struggle with depression and anxiety, and COVID, I mean, it was awful. I mean, there's nothing, but there were times I didn't mind having to take social obligations off my calendar or narrow my group down to like 4 or 5 people. And yeah, absolutely. That resonates with me a ton.
And I think there were a lot, and that's why Penny, to the point where Penny felt okay enough to be able to go out, because actually like all her anxiety reduced because everyone was in the place where she always is. And I also researched a lot about times of crisis, people with agoraphobia specifically. There are documented cases in the Second World War of these housebound people in villages who they wouldn't leave when it was time to evacuate because they couldn't. But they would hide people, they would help people. In a crisis, they knew exactly what to do. Because when your adrenaline is that high all of the time, when something actually critical happens, you spring into action. Like people with anxiety are really, really good in crisis situations. They're really good in emergencies. Like maybe in everyday life, it's a struggle. I've had anxiety for 20 years, but and there are some everyday things that are really challenging. But in a time of crisis, we know how to spring into action. And I thought that was really interesting too, which is why Penny is able to help. She's able to help with the kids, and she's able to distract, with social services and things. And I wanted to reflect that too, that there's a strength in anxiety, that, we look at people like Penny, she's very unwell and she's really struggling, but that we write people like that off, and she has things to contribute. She has things to say. She has things to do. And she can be supportive too. And we don't often give people in her position that opportunity.
Oh, I love that. And people in the chat were mentioning too, this is a story about women. Like that's what this is about. This isn't a COVID story. COVID is secondary. And this is just a story about women. And Brenda mentioned too, that as women in some ways or another, we all have these little prisons that we find ourselves in. And it just feels so universal and like cathartic in that sense. And I don't know, I just like want to email Doubleday and just say like, hey, we're like the US like beta readers, like here we are, and guess what, we loved it, like there is an opportunity here, and we read it, and all the things that you were worried about, like we see your point, but no, like I don't know, but we all just were like, it's just kind of baffling in that way. But
I said I'm gonna tag him in my review and be like, oh, I just assumed. I'm sorry, I didn't even look. It was just a natural assumption.
Yeah. Also, too, I think part of what's happening is that publishing, just like so many other industries, I mean, yes, there were some books that were incredibly popular in the pandemic and in lockdown, and yes, that kept publishing afloat, but those were all back catalog. It wasn't new things. It didn't start being new things until sort of midway last year. So I think also we have the issue that in the pandemic, many people wrote books because they had the time to do it. So we have a market that's kind of flooded, and we have lots of voices and lots of stories all just kind of vying for attention. And I think it can be hard to know what they can take a gamble on. Because I do think for publishers, it is a gamble. Every time they take a book, they have to assess, like, is this going to make it, or is this going to flop? And it's a hard judgment to make. So we're in a funny time. Like we're just in a funny, we've been in a funny time for a long while, but I think we're still kind of feeling the effect of that.
Yeah, well, we're rooting for you here in the US. And you might have mentioned, did I miss it? Did you have a timeline for when, is it, you said 5, your next book, like timing wise, when that will be, you'll be ready to approach publishers or get out with that?
I'm still writing it. So
okay.
I'm still, but I need to kind of push ahead. So I'm hopeful. Where are we now? We're in November. So I'm hopeful that in about 6 months, I should have something to work with.
Okay.
yeah, I have to really gotta get and move on. But yeah, that's what I'm hoping to do.
That's exciting. A few of the girls in the chats were saying they were going to recommend that their library purchase some copies, which is such a great idea.
That's great. Thank you. That's a great thing to do. That's a nice thing to do. Thank you.
Yeah. Are you able to share a little bit about some writers that have either like influenced your work or just some favorites, favorite recent reads? I know it's hard. Like, I feel like when somebody's like, what's your favorite book or who's your favorite author? I'm like, oh, I don't know. And I just freeze and nothing comes to my mind. But just generally speaking, are there, writers that really resonate with you or books, something that you've read, on your nightstand lately?
Yeah. So I have a few books that when I'm writing that I look at, because I don't know if you guys do this too, but like I remember how books make me feel. I don't always remember everything about the plot or the characters, but I remember the emotion. I remember if I read something and like it changed how I felt. So I keep some books, like right here, I'm looking at them on my shelf, where I remember like when I'm writing, this is how I want to make people feel. So The Grapes of Wrath is one. So John Steinbeck. I look at that book a lot. I look at that book because he's got that one chapter about the turtle crossing the road, and it's a whole chapter just about a turtle trying to get across the road. And so I reference that a lot to just kind of remember like details are really, really important, and details are what make a character for people. I love A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. I've always loved A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. If you've never read it, it is a classic, and it is really old, but it's just beautiful. It's a beautiful, beautiful story. And I referenced that actually in When I Ran Away. She has a quote from A Tree Grows in Brooklyn in there. And then I change, like I read books all the time. So like I always have a favorite. Like there's just so many. I'm reading this right now. Notes on an Execution. Is that out in the US? Notes on an
Yeah, it came out in January.
Mm-hmm. This is amazing.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing. And I'm writing about a psychopath as well. So that's why this is like incredible book. I see, and I just saw Britt Bennett on the back, and I was like, yeah, Britt Bennett, also like The Vanishing Half, amazing, amazing book. Geez, there's so many. Girl A, is that popular in the US?
Is that like a thriller? It's a
thriller, yeah.
It sounds familiar. Was it maybe out last year? I could be wrong.
Yeah, it's probably in paperback now.
Okay.
That's an absolutely amazing book. Yeah, I mean, I could just go on and on forever.
I know, sorry to put you on the spot. I feel like as a reader, it just feels like so obvious. Like, of course I should have favorites, but it's hard to come up with.
Night Bitch by Rachel Yoder was that was a really, that book, I just think that is stunning. I think that's extraordinary, bizarre, and just extraordinary, really daring. I think she really took like big risks there with that one. Oh gosh, and what's this book? The Push.
Oh,
right. I know that was really that one's amazing too. So yeah, tons of book. Or I'm reading Hell of a Book now too. I don't know when this came out. This came out this year here. Hell of a Book. I was reading that. That's also really phenomenal. Oh, there's this other one that I just read recently that I was like, this is so beautiful. It's that book called Abundance by Jacob Guanzon, I think is how you say his name.
I haven't heard of that one.
Yeah, that one is about oh God, it's like tears your heart out. It's about a single dad who's just gotten out of prison, who's trying to take care of his son. And it's brilliant because it's about poverty, and every chapter is an amount of money that he has or that he needs or that he has in his pocket at that moment that he's trying to survive on. It's really beautiful. I think it won an award. I don't remember what it was, but it's really beautiful.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Yeah. I jotted everything down, so I can send this out in our chat too for Ilona's recommendations for us. I think I got them all. But thank you. Yeah. Tina says in the chat, tear my heart out, say no more. Yes.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have any other questions for Ilona before we sign off here?
Well, I wondered, Ilona, if a book that reminded me a little bit of your writing was Sorrow and Bliss and I wondered if that was something you had read or,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
to me, they're obviously not the same, but there were just some similar themes there with especially the darker sides of being a parent and a mom and a woman. And
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's a beautifully written, beautifully told book. I love that book. And people that really resonated with a lot of people, that book as well. She really hit a lot of people. So yeah, I definitely look at authors like her when I think about what I'm doing and trying to reach people. She's really, really amazing.
well, I just think you have such a way of describing motherhood and both with the insight and the humor. There's so many connections I've made in both your novels with being a woman, being a mom. I don't know, I'll look forward to your next novel too.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions here before we sign
I
off?
have a quick one about Mabel. So I guess my feeling at the end was that she realized like she was putting herself all for, say, her love of this God that she believed in. And in the end, isn't really God wanting love to be everything. And so here she was not having a relationship with her sons. And I felt like at the end, she finally realized that. And do you think that then she was going to stop being a Jehovah's Witness?
It's a really good question. When I was researching the Jehovah's Witnesses and what the rules are, I didn't realize how restrictive it can be when you get to the point where she is, as someone who was really taken it on. And for her, what it does for much of her life is it gives her community. It lets her communicate with people. Even as an elderly woman, she has a focus on a purpose, and she has contact with people, and she feels like she's doing something important. It gives her meaning. So it's really unfortunate that at the same time it can also, because her sons don't believe, that she has cut off her relationship with them, and that she's cut off her relationship with music, for example, because that's not allowed either. So when the pandemic happens, I don't know if you guys have had this, but here we started getting letters through the door from Jehovah's Witnesses because they couldn't go door to door anymore. So they started posting letters or putting letters through people's mailboxes to be able to continue to spread the good word. And I just thought, if you were Mabel and suddenly your whole community was cut off and your whole purpose was cut off and your whole way of communicating with people, suddenly she went from being this really active older woman to being alone. I think it was also the first time in a long time that she had a chance to think about why she was alone and did she have to continue that way. I think before she joined the Witnesses, she was religious anyway, because she makes that reference to the Jamaican gospel singer that she loved. I don't think she abandons religion. I don't think she can, because I think is such a part of who she is. But I hope that she, in that way that she has of bending rules, doing things because they're the right thing to do. I hope that she, and I think she does, regain contact with her boys, even if it's against the rules. I hope that she gets a bit more flexible. I don't think she would leave the church because I think it's too much a part of her being, and she's old. But I'm hopeful that she is back with her boys.
That line that you wrote there with that, something like God is not a mother. I can't remember exactly how you worded that, but that was kind of a line that stopped. Sorry, muted myself. That stopped me in my tracks, just for how powerful that was to her development. So anyway, I loved that. really loved that and her.
Yeah. I just think Mabel needed a chance to think about, she was so driven by this purpose when she had to stop and just think for a second about everything that she lost because of it. I think she just needed that space to think, because the church did save her. At that point in her life, the church did save her. And so she wanted to return that. But I think she also needed to come to terms a little bit with how much she was forced to give up. I do love her. I do love Mabel. She was a joy to write.
Anybody else?
I was just going to say that I loved just how you took all the individual characters and then their little relationships or even observations of each other. I would laugh so hard at Carla talking about like everybody, like basically. Anytime Carla was talking, I was just like, I'm dying laughing. But I thought it was just so interesting. It was just such a perfect blend of taking all those different personalities and life perspectives and things happening around them and doing it. I don't know. I think it's just a masterpiece, just so you know. So
Thank you. That's really, really kind. That's really kind. I have seen a couple of reviews where people have said, well, can all this happen? Can all these people be in one building like this? And I think they can. I really think they can. That's the thing, is like, we don't know the interior lives of people. That's why this was like, I found it so interesting to write, because I think you can have these 4 stories coexisting in the same building, and even more than that. If you've ever lived in an apartment building, you think about how many people are there living their lives, how many things are happening to them. Just because we don't know about it or we don't ask about it doesn't mean that it's not happening. So I think that intersection, when we actually get to find out about the interior lives of these women, that's the part that I think is really, really interesting, because I think it could happen. I think a lot, if you just think about who lives on your street and all the stories, all the lives, if you looked at them, if you just knocked on the doors, you'd find out amazing things. So yeah, I really enjoyed that too. I really loved when they would cross paths and what they thought about each other. That was really fun for me.
I love how at the end you used, or you kind of like highlighted it all with women. Like nobody really saw her, but she saw everyone so well that she was able to use each one for their and each one's unique personality to help herself. Because she was very calculating in how she, or who she gave what job to based off their personality and how they would help her. So, and nobody saw her, but she saw all of them so detailed. It was really cool.
She's so clever. And I think that's the other thing, is that people in her position, domestic workers, they're invisible, but they know what they know about the people that they work for. I mean, this must be fascinating. And people assume that they're not listening or paying attention because they just assume they're in the background. But the knowledge that they have about people, how to work with people, how to survive with people, I think that is, I think that's fascinating. So that's why I'm glad that we saw her do that she is really calculating, because she knows people really well, because people don't look at her, but she sees everybody.
I think you're spot on in saying that, we really truly never know what is going on with other people in our lives, and especially if we don't know them. Like, as I was reading this, I had 2 close friends go through something very terrible and very hard, and you would never in a million years know it. And so how much more are we not in tune with, just our neighbors? And so I think, like you said, it's very possible that this could be the case. Yeah, Tina in the chat said, I grew up in an apartment, and you nailed the apartment neighbor living.
Yeah, I've lived in many apartment buildings. They're fascinating places, apartment buildings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Abby copied the quote down for us. I totally teared up at that quote. It's just so, like, just perfectly worded. Yeah. whose lavender hats and coffee preferences and walking sticks, they do become a part of your life that you just see them and that's just who they are. And that's just that item you associate with them.
Yeah.
But like thinking about where they're actually going and what they're doing in their life. Yeah.
It's also
Yeah.
one of those weird thoughts where you think that everyone is a passerby to you, but you're a passerby to someone else, like one of those mind bending. Yeah. Like I probably pass people in Starbucks that think there's that girl that I see every Thursday, just
Mhm.
I love books that make you think and it makes you want to know about people more.
Right.
So anyway.
So great. Well, we would love to take a picture. Does everybody have their book? At the end of our chats, we love to like, if we have our books to hold up and like snap a photo, would be
Oh,
so
that's so
great.
nice.
Yeah.
I love that. You have to send that to
Yeah.
me. That's so nice.
Okay. Ivana, are you taking a picture?
I think I can do this.
Okay,
If
this
you
is
remember.
still not in my wheelhouse, so I'm glad.
Okay. Hold on. Can share it? Oh yeah, it is. Okay. Okay. Let me grab my book too. Okay, ready? Set. 1, 2, 3, cheese. Oh, there you go.
Oh, that's so cool.
I will send that out to everybody.
Great. That's so cool.
So wonderful. Thank you for taking the time, especially where in London timing right now. You're probably ready to like go to bed. You need to sleep.
It's fine. It's fine. It's such a pleasure. I'm so happy to do this, to chat with you. Thank you for taking the time. It's Sunday to come and talk with me. It's really, really nice. And again, like just seeking out the book, buying it. I really appreciate that. Telling your friends, posting about it, all these things that you guys have been doing. It's like, it really means a lot. When you're at the start of a career, you really have to grind it out. You really gotta be on social media and try to make a presence and try to get people to see you. And the fact that you guys have done all this, I mean, it's really, really, really means a lot to me. I really appreciate it, and that you love the women. That's important to me too, because I love them, and I'm glad that you love them and that you've connected to them. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. We just can't wait to see what you come up with next and how we can get Little Prisons into the hands of more readers here. So we are so thankful that you joined us.
Thank you so much. It was really fun. And thank you for all the questions. Great questions. Thank you. It was
Yes.
really, really fun.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Okay. You guys too. Have a good week.
Bye, guys.
Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye, girls.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Mom.
Bye. Nice job, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye,
Now I
Lynn.
gotta go read another book.
Okay.
I know. Yes, such is the life of a
Too
reader.
bad it's not Little Prisons.
No.
But we
Tough
can
life.
reread, right?
Yep.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, ladies. Thank you too so much. Kelly, thank you so much.
Yes.
Really, really amazing momentum that you built. It's amazing. Thank you so much.
Well, it was our pleasure. We're really happy to do it. So thank you again for joining us.
We'll keep spreading the word. Everybody needs to know and everybody needs to read it.
Agreed.
Thank you. Thanks, ladies. Have a good rest of your Sunday.
Bye,
Bye.
Ilona. Sorry, my lighting here. I keep having to get up. It's either like blinding. I'm at the lake at my in-laws, and it's either like
Oh, is
blinding
that where you
sunlight,
are?
and then or like I shut the blinds, and then my thing went to night vision for a little bit. I was like, okay.
I thought I saw you go in the dark.
Oh, I'm gonna end the recording really quick.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Why is it not? Oh, here.